The apartment was cheap for a reason. That's what the landlord, a tired man with a permanent sigh etched onto his face, told me. Thin walls, he'd said, gesturing vaguely at the expanse of pale yellow plaster. Old pipes. Buildings got character. Character, I thought, was just another word for problems you learn to live with. But the rent was a steal, a little slice of affordability in a city that was bleeding me dry. I signed the lease without a second thought. I should have had a second, a third, and 100 more thoughts. The first night was unsettling, but not in a way you can put your finger on. It was just a feeling. The kind of quiet that feels too loud. I unpacked boxes, ordered a pizza, and tried to make the empty rooms feel like home. It was around midnight when I first heard it, a whisper. So soft, so careful, it was like someone was trying to tell a secret but was terrified of being overheard. I froze, pizza crust halfway to my mouth. It was a murmur, indistinct, like the ghost of a conversation. I told myself it was the neighbors. Thin walls, right? I walked over to the wall that separated my new bedroom from the next apartment and pressed my ear against the cool plaster. Silence. Just the muffled hum of the building's ancient refrigerator. I pulled away, feeling a little foolish. And that's when the whisper returned. It wasn't coming from the other apartment. It felt closer, as if it was right beside my ear. Can you hear us? It breathed. Just 3 words, a question hanging in the stale air. A chill shot down my spine that had nothing to do with the drafty windows. I laughed, a nervous, shaky sound that didn't sound like my own. Just tired, I muttered to the empty room. First night jitters, that's all it was. The second night, the jitters turned into genuine fear. The whispers were back, and this time they weren't just random murmurs. They knew my name. Alex, it started, a chorus of hushed, overlapping voices. They spoke in fragments, broken sentences that painted a horrifying, incomplete picture. He locked us in, one voice pleaded, sounding like a child. Please don't ignore us, another one rasped, old and frail. A third voice, sharp with panic, sliced through the others. She's still alive. I spent the night with my head buried under the pillows. But their words seeped through, worming their way into my head. I didn't sleep. The next morning, fueled by coffee and rising dread, I called the landlord. His voice was thick with annoyance, as if my call was the 100th interruption of his day. I explained what I was hearing, the names, the pleading. He let out that same tired sigh I remembered from our first meeting. That, he said, his tone dismissive. They always hear them at first. The building's just settling. Give it time. You'll get used to it, always. They? He spoke as if the whispers were a known feature, a quirky little amenity like the leaky faucet in the bathroom. Get used to it? I asked, my voice rising. People are screaming for help inside my walls. He just mumbled something about old buildings and hung up. I was alone with them. Sleep became a forgotten luxury. The apartment, once a symbol of a fresh start, now felt like a tomb. The walls themselves seemed to change. They felt warm to the touch, almost like skin, and I could swear I felt a faint, rhythmic vibration, like a slow, shallow breath. That's when I started noticing the scratches. Down by the baseboards, hidden in the corners of the room. Long, uneven gouges in the plaster. They looked exactly like marks left by fingernails, dragged desperately across the surface. Who had been here before me? What had they been trying to escape? The whispers became my constant companions. They were the first thing I heard when I woke up and the last thing I heard before I drift into a fitful, nightmare-plagued doze. I started talking back to them, first in my head, then out loud. Who are you? I'd ask. What do you want from me? Their answers were always the same. Broken pleas, fragments of terror. Then one night, about a week in, the whispering stopped. The sudden, absolute silence was 1,000 times more terrifying than the noise. The quiet was heavy, suffocating. It was an alert, a warning that something had changed. I lay in bed, heart hammering against my ribs, straining to hear anything. And then it came. A sound that made my blood run cold. Knocking. Not on my front door. Not from the hallway. It was coming from inside the wall right beside my bed. Thump! 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 It was slow, deliberate, and sounded utterly desperate. It was the sound of someone trapped, using their last ounce of strength to signal for help. The sound resonated in my bones. I couldn't ignore it, not anymore. I wasn't going to get used to it. Adrenaline surged through me. I jumped out of bed, my mind racing. I needed to know what was in there. I rummaged through my half-unpacked toolbox and found a hammer. Its weight felt solid, reassuring in my trembling hands. I stood before the wall, the knocking continuing its grim, steady rhythm. Thump, thump, thump. I swung the hammer. The plaster cracked on the first hit, a spiderweb of fissures spreading from the point of impact. It was surprisingly brittle, almost rotten. I struck it again and a large chunk crumbled away, falling to the floor in a cloud of white dust. My heart sank. Behind the plaster wasn't brick or insulation. It was another wall. A wall made of dark, aged wood. And it was covered in names. Hundreds of them. Scratched, carved, and gouged into the wood. Sarah, Daniel, Maria, Lai Wei. The names spanned decades, written in different hands, some neat, some a frantic scrawl. Some were crossed out with vicious, angry lines. Others were carved so deeply that the wood around them had splintered. My own name, Alex, wasn't there. Not yet. My eyes scanned the horrific tapestry of names until they landed on the center of the wooden wall. There was a small, circular opening, no bigger than a quarter. It was a peephole. As I stared, something moved within the darkness. An eye. It stared back at me. It was wide, unblinking, and webbed with red veins. It was the most terrified eye I had ever seen. A tear of blood trickled from its corner. Then, a voice, a dry, cracked whisper, came from the hole. The same whisper I'd heard on my first night, but now filled with a chilling finality. You shouldn't have listened. Before I could even scream, the wall exploded inward. Hands burst through the wood, not just one pair, but dozens. They were pale and thin, with fingers that bent at impossible angles. They grabbed me, their grip like iron. Nails dug into my skin as they pulled me toward the wall, toward the darkness that lay behind it. The whispers were gone, replaced by a deafening symphony of screams. They weren't begging anymore. They were warning. A chorus of the damned, shrieking a single unified message of terror. Through the chaos, through the splintering wood and the clawing hands, I saw a figure standing calmly in the doorway of my apartment. It was the landlord. He wasn't sighing anymore. A faint, serene smile played on his lips. He watched as the wall consumed me, as the darkness pulled me in. They never stop whispering, he said, his voice soft, almost gentle. But they quiet down once someone new joins them. The wall sealed behind me, the wood magically mending itself, leaving no trace of the hole I had made. The light from my apartment vanished, plunging me into absolute blackness. I was part of the wall now. I could feel the others around me, their fear, their regret, a collective consciousness of despair. We are trapped in the space between spaces, and after a time a new tenant moves in. We hear their footsteps, their laughter, their hope. And we can't help ourselves. We have to warn them, we have to try. So when they press their ear to the wall, trying to find the source of the noise, I whisper with the others. We ask them, "Can you hear us?" And we pray that this time someone will do more than just listen,